Please take your seats. The session will begin in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. The session will begin in 5 minutes.
Why is healthcare still failing the people who need it most? In the world today, stockouts are rampant, people can't afford care, and often wait for service that never comes. This costs lives. We live in the age of smart cars and smart assistants, but the most powerful intelligence in public health isn't artificial. It's human. This is where community-led monitoring, or CLM, changes everything. Communities track, report, and respond in real time to stockouts, discrimination, and blind spots in the system. This doesn't just fill gaps, it shifts power, putting people at the center of decisions. Because data without people isn't intelligence, it's noise.
Malawi has just become the first country in the world to commit to embedding community data in its national health system. Grounded in a legacy of community leadership in HIV prevention and care, the Ministry of Health, ITPC, and communities are creating a model of accountability that can inspire countries across Africa and beyond.
CLM is already saving lives and proving that the smartest health systems are the ones who listen to the people they're built to serve.
Please welcome to the stage from Under the Desk News, Vitas Visper.
Hi, besties. How are we doing? Welcome. I'm V. Spear, the host and creator of Under the Desk News. I use my citizen journalism platform to reach more than 4 million subscribers who tune in daily for content that informs and educates while centering the emotional safety of the viewer. How many people in here would describe yourself as dust bunnies? Do you know what the dust bunnies are? Those are the super fans of Under the Desk, and yes, they did name themselves. If you are a traditional journalist out there right now, I am going to tell you 10 out of 10, take the creator route. The fans are awesome. The water is fine. There's plenty of room for everybody. Start your creator journey. My aim with the channel was to provide accessible, accurate news to millennials and Gen Z who are increasingly turning to social media for both local, national, and international news. My work feels more important than ever as the erosion of trust in public institutions and the sustained assault on facts, science, and independent media poses an existential threat to democracy and public well-being. I'm glad to be here today to introduce 3 commitment makers who are doing their part by developing the next generation of leaders. They expand access to mental health, wellness, and mentoring services for young people. Their work centers on young people as leaders of the future and aims to build their leadership skills, provide access to mentorship, provide mental health and wellness services, and improve their ability to spot mis- and disinformation. Please join me in welcoming the following commitment makers to the stage. Susan Antolin from Women for Afghan Women. You can clap. Katya Hancock from Young Futures. And Sandy Bassin from Her Story. Welcome to the stage, friends. Women for Afghan Women has been supporting Virginia's large Afghan diaspora through a community center and other initiatives that target young people. In response to the specific need for a program tailored to the youth who arrive in the United States during the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, WAW is committing to launch a culturally responsive youth leadership program for Afghan refugee youth between the ages of 14 and 18. The program will focus on cultural integration, mental health and well-being, leadership development, and mentorship to give young people the confidence to thrive academically, socially, and emotionally in a new environment. 25 Afghan youth recently completed a summer pilot session that featured weekly sessions on topics such as mental wellness, gender equity, and college and career readiness, alongside guest speakers, field trips, and sports activities. As the 2025-2026 school year kicks off, Women for Afghan Women is expanding the program to reach up to 50 students and foster the next generation of leaders. There is a significant youth mental health crisis in the United States, driven... Oh wait, we should clap. We're moving on to the next one. My gosh. Our next honoree is Young Futures. There's a significant youth mental health crisis in the United States driven by social media, external events like climate change and school shootings, and social isolation. 40% of young people report feeling persistently sad and hopeless, and for girls, it's more than half. In response, Young Futures is committing to provide $25 million in direct funding and organizational support to 500 nonprofit leaders working at the nexus of youth, technology, and well-being. All recipients will participate in the YF Academy to receive expert coaching and peer support to strengthen their fundraising strategy, organizational scaling, sustainable growth, and impact storytelling. YF's in-house storytelling outfit, the YF Studio, will produce content such as grantee features, youth-led campaigns, toolkits, and thought leadership pieces to deepen the public's understanding of the significant impact technology has on youth mental health. By the end of 2030, this initiative aims to reach 60 million young people across the United States. And our final honoree is Her Story Mentorship. Adolescence is a particularly vulnerable time, especially for girls, and even more so as technology use and online spaces proliferate. There is a significant correlation between social media and girls' negative body image and low confidence, and these pressures often discourage girls from playing sports. To create a space where girls can feel safe and supported and explore their interests and build resilience, Her Story Mentorship is committing to host a summit for 400 girls in Los Angeles. The summit will offer girls training and tools to enhance their mental health and well-being and to keep them engaged in confidence-building activities like sports and develop positive social media habits. In addition, 500 parents, caregivers, and community leaders will also receive training to support the young girls in their lives. After the summit, the girls will have the option to receive facilitation training to lead their own workshops at school and in their communities, providing them with valuable leadership experience and an opportunity to connect with their peers. Please join me in recognizing these commitment makers. I hope you are feeling inspired to take action with them or to launch a commitment of your own. As we're learning, the very nature of our future will rely on people like us safeguarding the truth and information from relentless attacks. Thank you to all of you. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much. Yep, you take it with you. Oh boy, this is an impressive room, I gotta say, and a testament to the fact that the Clinton Global Initiative is now making sure that new media is being included in the legacy media rooms. They've got a TikToker to host this panel. How many people use TikTok in this room? Couple? Okay, pretty good, not bad. I could not be more honored to be here and for another opportunity for us to build a strong information ecosphere together, and most of all, try and rebuild the trust in experts and empathetic communicators who still believe in coming together to do the next right thing. We know that trust in institutions is eroding and disinformation is accelerating. Is it mass media conglomeration? Is it the proliferation of alternative facts that affirm our biases that we're so drawn to? Or is it just the Russian AI bots that flood our comment sections on social media with divisive and untrue narratives? Are we just bored? And it's more fun to be a conspiracy theorist online or play subject matter expert. Right now, we're going to hear from someone whose work sits at the intersection of science, innovation, and public good. We're going to answer the question, how can we protect the truth and rebuild trust? Please welcome me in joining Dr. Nubar Afghan. Hi. You made it from the UN. I did. That's quite the accomplishment already. So, Nubar, you see science as a force for human progress. How do we reassert science as a trusted source of truth when institutions are losing deference and folks are turning to new media influencers and Discord chat boards for their facts?
So just that? That's
the Discord chat.
Easy question?
Just
okay. We operate we work on scientific discoveries that can be converted into medicines or new forms of food, agriculture, etc. And so, obviously, we're living in a time where there's a blurring of the line between scientific fact and opinion. It goes both ways. I think what is established scientific fact is being questioned by the other side, which is offering opinions, and opinions are being put forward as facts. And so it's really a two-way thing. Now, you might say, is this something unique, and has this happened before? Well, science is all about excavating the unknown. People think that it's really about the known, because that's what we get taught in school, but the frontiers of science is like excavation. There's a lot we don't know. There's a methodology that's been developed over centuries, refined over the last few decades, made at very large scale, where we take unknown, think of it as Bitcoin mining, unknowns, and following a methodology and rigorous testing and repetition and skepticism and all sorts of things, we move them to the category of knowns. And then we put a little asterisk and we say, by the way, even that may later on be challenged, so it's what we assume is fact for the time being. In the middle of that, there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of skepticism within the scientific community. But what is happening is that because there's that debate and everything is subject to questioning, now it's being questioned with nothing on the other side being offered as actually fact. So how do we restore trust, which is an important word? I think first we have to trust the process. It's a little bit like saying, why do we trust surgeons to do surgery? At the end of the day, they're not doing it in exactly the same way, but they're following a process that they spent decades learning and perfecting. And I think what we also need to do is to make sure that the experts in the various fields limit themselves to expressing expertise in areas they actually are experts in. And I would also, to be fair about it, point out that there's, especially during the pandemic, there were all sorts of scientific medical experts who were expressing things about a particular virus and a particular disease that they actually knew nothing about. And I think that added to the dilemma we now have, because it was open season to questioning whether masks work or diagnostics work or therapeutics work or vaccines work. And afterwards, people said, yeah, maybe they still don't work. And oh, by the way, while we're at it, maybe all vaccines don't work. And the thing I'll warn you about, and this is kind of like self-evident to me, is I see no reason why this stops with mRNA or with vaccines. I think this continues with being bacteria skeptics or being metabolism skeptics or being obesity skeptics or being cancer skeptics. Because once you open that floodgate and you say what is being used to support the decisions that the FDA makes and others is subject to opinion, kind of it's a really weird society to live in. So I guess what we have to do is the scientific world, the business world, has to be disciplined in what we claim is fact, established fact. And then we have to require anything that's challenging it to come up with equally rigorous fact. Publications, not 2 publications out of 10,000, but publications that truly stand up to the test of scientific rigor.
What are we going to do, though, when the health secretary gets out there and says that Advil causes, or Tylenol causes autism? I think, what you're saying makes sense to the folks in this room and to the people who really genuinely care about facts, but how can the facts and science breakthroughs keep up with the misinformation that's coming, in this case, from the government?
Look, obviously, just about everything that we experience today is influenced by politics. There is no corner. Sports is influenced by politics, media is, everything's, and now science and medicine and everything is being influenced by politics. Regulation is. But instead of kind of saying, I wish it wasn't so, because it's going to be so, and probably it's going to be so for a long time, not just with the current people in various positions, I think we just have to kind of go back to basics and say, okay, let's have that debate, but show up with facts. I mean, if we're willing to assume that opinions and facts are interchangeable, then there really is nothing to debate, because then anything can be, we could say the earth is flat. And I know that's not a very easy thing to say, but I really do think that there's been a historic way that society, not government, society has decided what to rely on to make judgments. So I can't comment on, I have not even had the time to look at the facts that were presented in support of that contention, but it can't just be that there's 5,000 things on one side, 2 or 4 things on the other side. I just think we ought to, as people, expect our leaders to produce support and documentation, especially when it affects the most dear things to us, which is our lives and our health. So I think as long as I worry that with media and with all the different social networks, et cetera, that our expectations from leadership is diminishing on a daily basis, so that we don't expect them to actually be rigorous in what's being asserted. Now, I know this is an idealistic statement, But I think the consequence of not doing so is so grave, we will make pretty big, tragic mistakes. It'll cost lives. And so as that becomes manifest, I think people will start panicking, and eventually people will go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how did we get here? And how do we restore confidence in the rigor of the process? By the way, it's an interesting word. I learned a while back, because when I do science, I talk to people about faith. You might find it interesting. You might say, what does a scientist have to do with faith? And the literal definition of faith is belief without facts. You might think faith has no place in science. Faith does have a place in science. It's what you do at first. It's called a hypothesis. You believe something without facts long enough to actually test it. When you test it, it either falsifies your belief, in which case you change your faith to another faith, in terms of that particular scientific experience. But I'm using that word because I think that's a word that all humans understand. You need to temporarily use faith to muster the will to do the experiments, to falsify it. So we are in science constantly questioning beliefs. That's our DNA. But the problem is when people who are not trained in that methodology come in and say, how about I question your beliefs? Well, that is troublesome.
So how do you think we can rebuild trust when we know that a lot of the conversations about public health are happening in places like Discord chat rooms or TikToks, and they're not coming necessarily from experts? Sometimes they're coming from very good faith people who think they read something, thought they understood it, want to communicate it back to their friends and family. Is there a way that we could be using science breakthroughs to rebuild trust in those original experts, or training the experts how to be better TikTokers?
Yeah. Well, that latter part, you could probably help guide. Look, I think I've given lots of talks in various settings, like the National Academy of Engineering and Science, where this issue is a big issue, because I do think people realize that we've let society down by not being more vocal as scientists, engineers, technologists in this matter. I actually think that it is a bit of a letdown where the information technology scientists and technologists haven't spoken up and said, look, if you're going to start doubting this, you should doubt the underlying computer chips in your iPhone. You should doubt, because they're all based on the same scientific, rigorous process. There's no difference between the two. So how do we restore trust? I think first, scientists have to assume this is not somebody else's problem. I worry that lots of scientists think, well, I'm not a communicator, I wasn't trained, I'm not on TV, I don't even look good, so what am I doing describing this? Look at me. And the answer is, it's my responsibility to speak about this. Because if I don't, who's going to speak about it? Somebody less knowledgeable than me in any event, or I'm not even an expert, so I shouldn't consider myself. So I think a responsibility comes with what you're working, especially if you're at the frontier excavating new knowledge. Because if you go there, you're in this toxic environment where nobody believes you can do something, and you persist and you come up with a discovery, no, you can't go back and say, well, somebody else has to convince other people to trust us and use this stuff. It's up to us. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is consistency. You can't one day engage in this, the other day say, okay, now we're good, people trust us, let's go do. So there has to be a consistency. Obviously, you have to adjust to the modern means of communication, which lends itself to a certain amount of expertise in those media. We need to figure that out. But I think, look, trust, unfortunately, like everything else, like a building, is very hard to build and really easy to destroy. And that's what we're experiencing. And I frankly think this is not, it's incumbent on society, on organizations, to speak up and say, you know what, we don't really want people questioning the underlying science arbitrarily and then causing people to make wrong health decisions. That is the direct consequence of what's going to happen. I think once it starts affecting, listen, if we're going to die, some of us are going to die because of a pandemic of mistrust, then they're going to die because of a pandemic of mistrust, and at some point, we're going to want to vaccinate ourselves or test ourselves around how much this is affecting us. It'll be just like another pandemic. That's what I think we're going to, because it is a false comfort that this is limited to certain narrow areas. These narrow areas, coupled with higher education coming under a broadside attack altogether as being too removed, too elitist, all those have truths. All these things always have half-truths. But the reality is they've also been the place where people constantly were debating these things. They're kind of being mistrusted. So we're in a tough place.
To go to the next tough place, Moderna's success was built on decades of foundational research, and that research was obviously very well funded, and now we're seeing the government make massive cuts to funding of public health and research. Is there something that the global community could be doing to help fill those gaps, or how do we get this funded? How do we save what's left?
Well, look, I think the U.S. has been the kind of bastion of scientific funding in cutting-edge research in every field, and I expect that beyond the recent disruptions, we will resume that, because it's first of all a security issue. Our national security, our economic security, our health security, our food security is entirely dependent on the knowledge economy we've built this country on. And I don't see us outsourcing science. It's kind of ironic, we're complaining about China manufacturing low-cost goods and sending them here, costing us manufacturing jobs. We're in the process of exporting our scientific jobs and our innovation jobs. So I don't know what's better, hanging on to jobs many people don't want here, or jobs that are rewarding people for the investment they've made in becoming kind of experts, and then only to find. So I think that I'm hoping, obviously hope springs eternal, especially when you're doing science, because you don't succeed very often. But I think that we will find a way to get ourselves back. By the way, if we don't, look, there's scary statistics that we don't show in these things. More patents are filed in the biomedicine field in China today than in the US. A couple of years ago, China was half as many, and then 10 years ago, it was 10% as many. They're not stopping innovating, and these numbers will soon become 10-to-1 ratios. And you might say, big deal, we'll just take their stuff and we'll make it here. It doesn't work that way at the cutting edge. It does work that way with old technology. So look, this is a country I immigrated to. I'm not born here, so I call myself an American by choice. Therefore, I really, really care that this country not loses competitiveness. This country's competitiveness is largely dependent on innovation, and the innovation is going to come from believing in the underlying processes from which innovation comes. And so all I could say is really on everybody in this room and everybody else to really make this an important issue. Otherwise, we're going to feel it on our health. We're going to feel it everywhere else.
Is there something that the folks in this room can do today to help rebuild trust in science?
I mean, look, the word trust and the word science are such big words that combining them, I have no idea how to rebuild trust in science. It's almost a kind of a philosophical
Maybe in the science communicators, the real ones.
Yeah, I think you should demand more from the people who are basically speculating in the guise of scientific fact. There's just no, if you ask one or two questions later, either people will shout back at you or call your names or basically think that you have some ideology you're espousing. The ideology you're espousing generally is scientific fact versus scientific fiction, and you just, you have to ask these questions. I think if enough people ask questions, as opposed to, all of us are curious. An interesting thing about science is it draws curious people, and we are trained to be skeptics. Like I don't know if you've heard the word organized skepticism. Science is driven by organized skepticism. That's what we do. But that opens the door for uninformed skepticism, which is basically just like, I don't believe you. Well, okay, but that, during the pandemic, so I was involved in Moderna, so during the pandemic, we were working pretty hard in making an mRNA vaccine that ultimately, some people have reported, have saved a lot of lives. We can debate how many lives, but it's in the many, many millions. And it's a scientific fact that that's happened, because you can measure in places that weren't vaccinated how many people died, adjusting for age, for every kind of health condition, and then you can look at what happened in the vaccinated population, and the difference is 10-to-1 difference, right? Now, there's tons of statistics around that. But during that period, I remember well, early days where you say, how can you develop a vaccine in a year when it usually takes 4 to 5 years? And you go, well, because there's a pandemic, and the last time there was a major pandemic was 1918, where they didn't have, they had electricity, but they didn't have computers, they didn't have much. So, why can't we try to do this? And they go, well, you can't. Any vaccine developed in less than 5 years must not be safe. That is a scientifically untrue statement. That is a hypothesis. So I think what we just need to do, it's also hard because when you get defensive, people think you're selling them something. Right. And so what you've got to do is just ask people to ask questions. If you just believe everything that you're told, then it's really hard to actually protect yourself. So I'd say it's a defense mechanism. We should demand more.
Thank you for that, Dr. Newbar. It's so great to have your perspective here. Thank you. We are going to shift focus from the experts in science to the people who are tasked with presenting that science and talk a little bit about the attack on journalism and on science communicators right now. Not just in the trad and legacy media spaces, but also in the digital spaces. Sometimes we get a really great science communicator on a social media platform who is showing up on that STEM feed and reaching young people and getting them excited. And then somehow, either the burden of being a creator and trying to be a scientist at the same time gets to them, or they become attacked by opposition, people who don't like that they're reaching kids and new audiences. They don't like what that person's science is saying. We have lots of epidemiologists who are creators online. We have lots of science-type lawyers that are creators online, trying to get good information to people and running into really dangerous things like death threats. Like, who would think a TikToker who talks about science is getting death threats? But it happens. So we're going to talk to two folks today about how we protect journalists, and that also includes citizen journalists and just your average communicator online. I want to welcome to the stage Jody Ginsburg from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and Matthew Siegel of Attention. How are you guys?
Oh, it's all good.
Any death threats today?
Probably.
Probably. We haven't checked the email. We'll get the publicist on that. You guys are really shaping the future of how we produce and distribute and consume information. What have you said is like the biggest issue you're running into? Let's go within just the last year when it comes to fighting disinformation. Has something changed from the way we've always been fighting disinformation?
I'll let you take that first.
So we're facing many of the same challenges that we've always faced, right? Which is those in power seeking to control the narrative, but that has escalated dramatically. So we have governments in supposed democracies, including the United States, where the leaders actively critique and criticize and denigrate the media, and that then has a knock-on effect where people feel that it's okay to attack journalists online, which is why you're seeing these death threats that you talk about, and then that morphs into threats in the offline world where people are physically attacked at protests in their homes. And so it is manifestly unsafe for journalists around the world, and of course that's exacerbated by the fact that we also have a record number of conflicts happening around the world, including in Gaza, which is currently the deadliest place in the world to be a journalist. And so all of that is creating an environment where it is more dangerous than ever to be someone who is reporting facts.
And Matt, you've been engaging with younger audiences. You have a great way of getting young people interested in the news. Is there some secret sauce to getting the next generation, it was millennials, now it's Gen Z, to pay attention and feel empowered?
Sure, it's a great question. So we built a media company at Attention, which I started 10 years ago, that grew to 18 million social followers around packaging topical issues in a more entertainment-forward way to get people to pay attention. I would say a pithy way, or ways that were clever and digestible to the extent we experimented with how to be clever and digestible. But the answer is packaging. As you well know, V, when you program to social media outlets, you have between 1 and 3 seconds to reach the consumer. You're competing with every kind of supply of content imaginable, animal videos, cooking videos, celebrity gossip, hard news, tragedy, hot takes. And so you have to have a lot of creativity and alacrity with how you pull people in. So everything comes down to, what is your headline? What is your attention grabber? And at times, especially if you want to be responsible and centrist and not just appeal to the polarities, that's very hard, because responsible information reporting is really something that shouldn't necessarily be inherently tendentious. But the question is just, how do you then come up with a headline or a packaging that gets people to care, and that's what we try to do at our company. And I'll give you one fun example. My favorite video where we sort of unlocked this insight was we made, in the early days of our company, an explainer on gerrymandering. Very few people, maybe outside of CGI, know what gerrymandering even is. And we first tried the straightforward way of, this is a corrupt way that districts are drawn. It generated very little traction. But when we headlined it, you ever wonder why politicians act like such clowns? We can explain this through one word called gerrymandering. It went viral. And I think that kind of packaging, even though it was a very sober, down-the-middle explainer, is what you need to do to get people to pay attention.
Talking about conflicts and legacy media journalists trying to get those eyeballs on their stories, and most people aren't reading full articles, they're catching that quick social media clip. I know that I make content for people who are watching me 20 minutes before they go to bed or when they're in the bathroom, okay? That's when people scroll TikTok.
Excellent.
How do legacy media, foreign correspondent, deeply serious journalists catch people's attention when they know that that's sort of the attention they're competing for?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to cut through. And it's not difficult just to cut through because you're competing with cat videos or people wanting to go to the bathroom. It's also that there is just so much information. We are deluged 24/7. There are I have lots of people say to me now, I can't watch the news. I just can't watch the news anymore. It's too depressing. It's depressing domestically. It's depressing internationally. I can't keep up with everything, so I'm not going to do anything. And so some of the ways to catch attention, I think, again, are to go back and find several different ways of getting to people. So what you're seeing with a lot of legacy media is short explainers, people who were text-based journalists trying video explainers, people going to long form. One of the very interesting things that we're seeing increasingly is a real hunger for explanatory material. Actually, people they do want bites, but they also want something a little bit longer, something that explains it, something that sets the context, because they're hungry, they're so deluged with information, but it doesn't explain things. It doesn't help you understand what gerrymandering is. And so there is actually we're seeing a swing back to a willingness for people to spend a bit more time and actually understand so that they can be informed. That's why we do the work that we do.
I have to agree with you. The short stuff keeps you fed, but the long stuff makes you not hungry. And I think that it brings us to the point of media literacy and seeing journalists as critical friends, neighbors, and parts of the community that we need to protect. What kind of things are you dealing with right now with a government that's currently in power who says that journalists are the enemy or that this is all fake news? Like, how is that affecting the actual physical safety of truth and storytellers?
It has an enormous impact on the physical safety. If you say someone is a criminal, if you say someone is the enemy of the people, there are vast swathes of the population who will believe that. And so we are seeing, as I mentioned, increased numbers of death threats, online harassment, threats to people's families, people showing up at newsrooms, graffitiing newsrooms, throwing paint at the walls of homes and so on. So it has an absolutely marked effect. But it's not just on safety. It's also a deliberate attempt for the consumer to doubt what the journalist is providing. If I keep saying V is untrustworthy, V is a liar, everything that V says is nonsense, at a certain point people will start to say, even if everything that you are producing is fact-based and factual, I don't really trust them. And that's deliberate. That is a deliberate strategy to control the narrative. It's exactly what authoritarian regimes do the world over. You designate the alternative version of facts as the enemy, and therefore you get to say whatever you like, and that becomes the truth.
What do you think the responsibility is of platforms right now to fighting mis and disinformation and making sure good information comes through? It used to be, you had to work to get the blue check mark, and that kind of meant something. Now, what is the bastion of a trustworthy person online?
Well, first, let me answer it by saying I think the responsibility has now fallen, sadly, on the schools. I'm a big proponent of digital literacy. I think that civics education needs to be totally reinvented to teach kids how to spot misinformation online, how to be more literate consumers. Finland just is the first government to now mandate this, that they're teaching kids in school how to separate the wheat from the chaff as to what they're consuming. And I think unless we equip kids from a very early age and have huge curriculum investment in this, frankly, I see us heading in an incredibly polarized direction, one that might even lead to like a civil war. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way. I think this is one of the most important issues that our education system needs to deal with because, to answer your question, the platforms have proven totally fruitless in their ability to produce anything meaningful in helping people and consumers spot what's real versus what's fake and to help coordinate their algorithms in ways that doesn't reward the loudest and most strident voices. If you look at what is mostly surfaced, especially in the news and information space, algorithmically on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, X, it's all the loudest, most strident content imaginable. So it's very, very hard to expect the platforms that are for-profit companies to deal with this other than when they're, before Congress and they talk the talk and they hire lobbyists from both sides. And they've proven an amazing ability to stave off regulation in meaningful ways. And so I actually think it just has to fall in the education system to empower consumers. I don't think anytime soon we're going to see platforms putting in place major trust and safety standards that really, frankly, matter.
And if I can just add, I think one of the things that we also need to be very careful about is, I think it's very easy to blame the platforms as the root of all ills and then say what we need is regulation. And I appreciate that you're really focused around education, because what we've seen internationally is that the introduction of fake news laws and so on, or regulation that's meant to rein in platforms, actually doesn't do that at all. It's generally used to stifle the speech of critics of the government and so on. So I think we need to be very, very careful in any solution that we don't automatically reach simply for regulatory levers that haven't been developed very carefully in ways that continue to protect independent, pluralistic media. And thus far, we've seen very few countries introduce that kind of measured legislation.
Do you think this is an opportunity for new funding? Like, should we be putting funding into trying to fix the divide between new and legacy media, or fix the divide between what's true and what's not true online? Or should we be building new platforms or new programs or new partnerships for educators? Because I know there's a lot of educators in the Midwest that are going to be like, I'd love to have that civics program. My school will never, ever approve that. But some sort of funding that could go into rebuilding, I don't know, Schoolhouse Rock or something like that?
The answer is yes. First of all, just yes, period. But then secondly, our company just made a incredible series that was on Nickelodeon called Well Versed, that was effectively a remake of Schoolhouse Rock for kids. And we got some states and curriculums to adopt it. But the truth is there needs to be a confluence of the private sector, of philanthropic outlets, some state governments who want to invest in this, and concerned citizens all speaking out, saying, if we don't teach our kids this, they have no ability to navigate what's true and what's false, especially with the proliferation of AI. You have AI coming, and it's so great, and I've seen it, that you can have a celebrity or political deepfake that looks 100% real, where the voice matching is 99.9% accurate and indiscernible to anyone. You don't know if the real person's doing the voiceover. And so when kids who are 13 watch that stuff, you think they can tell? And also when grandparents who are 85 watch that stuff, do you think they can tell? But it affects both sides of the spectrum. And it's predatory. And the algorithms can't keep up with it fast enough. They eventually take it down, but not before it's gotten 10 million views. And so I just think we have to come up with basic educational rubrics to teach people, here's how you at least fact check. Here's how you never, watch everything with a healthy skepticism. The guy on from Moderna right before us was saying you need healthy skepticism that, you look through both scientific information on, but also political and civic information. So that needs to be taught, and that's what I would call like a civics 2.0 that needs to be reinvented. It's not just teaching the Bill of Rights, but it's teaching how to be a literate consumer.
Jody, how are you seeing NGOs, nonprofit newsrooms, journalists coming together in collaboration successfully to protect the truth and to provide better protection for the actual truth teller?
So this is what I'm really excited about, because I think that is happening, and it's happening in lots of really innovative and interesting ways, particularly at the local level. So we've seen funders come together in the Press Forward initiative, for example, which brought together Knight, MacArthur, Ford, and others to really invest in local media, a lot of which is doing this very direct trust building, because a lot of trust building really relies on us having this face-to-face relationship. So we can do the education, we can do the legislation, we can put in new algorithms, but a lot of it is built around local. People trust their local media. They really do. And in times of crisis, they turn to their local media. We saw it in the wildfires in California, for example, earlier this year. We saw huge rise in the number of people turning to their local radio station. Local radio is not dead. In places where there isn't reliable broadband, they're turning to those kinds of sources. So those initiatives are happening, and quite often what would look like a traditional news outlet is engaged in civic engagement. So it would be sourcing information from the community and then talking back to it in town halls about how it used that information. They'll have online platforms. They'll be doing other kinds of events. And that is where I think we are going to see this bringing together of philanthropy, of content creators of different kinds, of local community-based media outlets to start to build, and they are building and learning from one another and building networks, and I think that is going to be transformative.
I totally agree. It's the in-person thing, knowing your news communicator. It's part of why I love living in Rochester, because I know I'm safe there, right? Nobody's going to let anything happen to me because they know me as their person. In the last couple seconds that we have here, can you both just give a final thought on what is next for journalism and safety?
Unfortunately, I think things are going to get worse before they get better. We are in a very dark place for democracies worldwide, and the first people to be attacked when democracies decline are always journalists. So the more we can do to speak out in their defense and the defense of press freedom, the more we are protecting democracy itself.
I think you'll see more consumer-supported creators like yourself who come out and really require the audience to subsidize it, because we never talked about the business models, but the business models of news are incredibly challenged.
That's a whole other day, but yes. Thank you both so much for being here. I wish we had more time. Jody and Matt. So our next panel is going to close us out with some of the super smarty smarts, okay? We're going to get the Pew Research guys up here. We're also going to talk to the International Fund for Public Interest Media. We've got Mike Dimmick and Nishant Lalwani. Welcome you guys to the stage in a second here. We're going to be talking a little bit about how we wrap our arms around everything that's gone on here, because in each one of the panels, the issue has partly been, how do we fund this? How do we pay for this? And with the limited resources we have, how do we make sure, if we do fund it, that we get something back from it? Because we might not have a second chance to try another crack at this, to try and invest in a different person if the first person we try fails. So welcome to the stage, Mike and Nishant. Hi. And I have to start by thanking you for making my career. In October of 2023, Pew Research published a paper that said 1/3 of people got their news on TikTok, and all of a sudden, me laying under my desk in a banana shirt telling people the news on TikTok was not cringe. It was very fascinating to people. And so thank you, Mike, for that. And on behalf of all creators who you really professionalized and gave validation to first. Our last panel was convening people who want to help us understand the crisis of truth and research and action. And I want to ask you guys, starting with you, Mike, surveys are showing a declining trust in government, in media, and in science. How does that play into a healthy society when people doubt who is supposed to be the expert?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, the decline in trust is something we're seeing across so many sectors, but that doesn't mean it's the same phenomenon in every sector or that the dynamic is the same in every sector, though they are interlinked. So I would put it into two big buckets. There's declining trust in people, right? That has been a long-term trend. It's gone through ups and downs. Maybe 30, 50, 40 years ago, maybe about half of us would answer the old survey question, can you trust the people around you to do what's right? Now it's down to about 32%, you know. That's also about trust in people in positions of power, right? The sense that people in positions of authority as individuals are trustworthy, that their motives are aligned with their stated, what they present their motives as. The second bucket is really trust in what you might call the way knowledge is produced. So you're seeing that in trust in science, trust in educational systems and higher education, trust in expertise in general, government, media, that there's a sense of a misalignment in the motives and incentives of people in those spaces, a sense of a lack of responsiveness to what people see their real needs are, and that's where a lot of frustration and backlash can come from.
Nishant, how is declining trust affecting funding? People don't usually like to invest in sectors that they don't trust.
Yeah, I mean, they're inextricably linked, those two things. And of course, since the attention economy became dominant, we've seen massive decreases in revenue to newsrooms. That's now becoming a lot worse with AI. So the AI summaries that I'm sure you've all seen on Google and other places, they're having a huge impact on news traffic. 46 of the top 50 news sites in the world have seen significant decreases. So the BBC.com, 13% down on last year, Fox News 25% down, CNN 34% down in 1 year. Now that's less, I mean, and some of our grantees, we work across the majority world, it's more like 70% decreases in ad revenue. That's less money for quality journalism, less money to reach audiences, and less money to build trust. And that also creates a huge gap, which is being filled. There are people who are investing, and they are the Russian and Chinese governments. The whole OECD combined, all 33 countries, invest just $300 million a year in terms of foreign aid going to media. And half of that goes to newsrooms in the Global South. Russia and China this year will fund $3 billion. That's 10 times the OECD amount. They'll fund $3 billion of propaganda and investments in newsrooms, equity investments across Latin America, Africa, and Asia and Eastern Europe. So they are seeing an opportunity to destabilize our democracies, to create polarized societies, and to sow distrust. I will say, though, I know this has not been the most optimistic panel, I will say that small investments can go a really long way. So in the last Moldovan election, Russia, according to Bloomberg News, put in $100 million to try and ensure that Maya Sandu was not elected, right? They were bribing election officials. They were trying to control the media. We at the International Fund, we put in $1.3 million into 4 news outlets. They did incredible work. The Serving Moscow series, you should check it out, on how the Russian bribes were taking place. Voters read it, circulation of one of those newspapers went up 30% because of those stories. And Maya Sandu, the pro-EU candidate, was elected. So we were outspent 100 to 1, but that's the beauty of media, is that when you have genuine fact-based stories and you're telling people things they don't know, it can have a huge impact. And that's why we set up the International Fund, so that we can do more of this kind of work.
Mike, do you have statistics on polarization right now? I mean, I can take a guess at how I feel every day with it, but what does Pew say about it?
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind about this moment in polarization, specifically in the US, which is actually a relatively extreme case at a global scale, is that this moment is about what the political scientists call affective polarization. It's about identity and an emotional sense of division that runs very deep. It's a gut reaction that people are having. The idea that Americans are actually more divided over the issues that we face in society, you can argue that actually different ways. The 60s and 70s were hardly a time of unity in America, but those issues didn't all cleave on a single dimension of our social identity. Today, every issue that we debate has collapsed onto this kind of singularity of division. So there's no room in the civic conversation for common, for overlapping discussion. But then you layer that on with what's been a heightened sense of deep disdain for the other side. You see this language all the time. They're evil. If they have power, it's the end of everything. This sort of extreme language that's out there on both sides, right? Which creates this sense of sort of deep, deep, deep division. How you measure that is really hard, but you see it playing out in many, many ways. It, of course, accelerates that sense of distrust because whoever is in power, the other side feels like it really is the end, and again, that's happened in both sides. The moment we're in now, I'm not saying isn't unique, but this has been a long-going trend.
Nishant, going back to the Moldova example, is there something that you can pull out for folks that was sort of like the fever breaker, that you were being outspent, propaganda was getting out there, but somehow the stories that the true journalists were telling were breaking the fever of like propaganda and division? What do you think was the secret sauce there?
Yeah, I think people can tell, and I think this about your show as well, like people can tell when you're trying to represent their interests and when you're trying to talk to them. Rather than talking at them or covering topics that they're not interested in or trying to influence them, right? People can tell. But in order to do that, you need local news. Trust is not just about the what, it's about the who is talking to you. And you need journalists who represent the communities and the audiences they're trying to serve. And in Moldova, we were funding Moldovan journalists to cover the issues that only they could really truly understand. And people got that. It's the same reason why one of our largest programs is in Palestine. We fund 22 news outlets across the West Bank and Gaza. And they've been incredibly important in shining a light on what's actually happening in the genocide, right? From a Palestinian perspective. I think that's really affected the global conversation. I think it's shaped the public's view both across the Arab world, but also globally on what's actually happening in the genocide. And to do that, though, you do need funding. You do need funding for local journalists, and you do need to be able to fund them in a way with core funding, unrestricted funding, so they can cover what's most important to them.
You make an excellent point, cover what's most important to them. Oftentimes, folks are trying to come in from a funding perspective, but they have like an idea of how they used to work with, let's say, a nonprofit newsroom or with legacy media, which is kind of like, here's the return that we want for the stories that we picked. How do you think we can better present facts to people that new creators and new media spaces are really moving the needle on the issues that they care about, but they're going to maybe have less control in what that sounds like? Asking for a friend.
Yeah, asking for a friend. No, it's a great point. I mean, we have hit a moment where the means of distribution have been decentralized. That may seem obvious, but that's actually quite profound. Let me just state it a little differently. Generating information like what we generate at Pew Research Center or what a big newsroom generates or what scientists generate in a lab, it's hard, expensive stuff, right? It's very hard to decentralize that very well. Disseminating information has become much more decentralized, right? The cost structure, that's a change, right? We used to be in a world where both the generation of information and the dissemination was sort of owned by centralized organizations because it was very expensive and hard to do, and it was often embedded together. That is a loss of control if you're in the information generation business, because you don't know who's going to share it. It's going to get out there in ways that you can't really own and control. But that's the way it is. And there are pros and cons to that, right? It's much more democratic. It's much more human-based. The trust is going to be based on that human-to-human connection rather than a brand or an institutional kind of weight. There are pros and cons to all of those things, but it is sort of the new reality that we're in. So I think those in the information generation business, you could rue that. You could say, oh, we should go back to a different day, but that different day isn't around, and so you try to seize the advantages that you can have in this new disseminated environment.
On the previous panel, we didn't get to it, but Matthew was pointing out that the funding is largely moving to subscribers. Like, my livelihood is based on if I can get people to subscribe to my Substack or if I can get them to subscribe to my YouTube streaming right now. Yeah. How do you think, with funding being pulled from different governments across the world, right, for journalism and protecting journalists and telling stories, even telling the national voice story in some places, what can we be doing to help fill gaps for those legacy newsrooms or for those nonprofit newsrooms if they can't rely on donor funding?
Well, I think that the first step is to truly value what public media and public interest journalism does for society, right? To be able to know how much funding we should give to media, we have to know the impact that it's having. And so what we did is we worked with 11 of the world's leading economists, so Nobel Prize winners like Joseph Stiglitz and Darren Acemoglu, economists like Mariana Mazzucato, Vera Songwe, and on Monday they published the economic imperative of investing in public interest media. And I wouldn't necessarily say this to everyone, but I think you guys are going to love reading it. Given that you're in this room and you're interested in this topic, you're going to love reading it. It is an attempt to value the economic value of media. We talk about public interest media as kind of an ideological thing, right? It's really important, it's the fourth estate, it's important for democracy. But actually it has a ton of value economically, technologically, and so on, right? The way that the economists describe it in the paper, which I really like, is they call it the central bank. Public interest media is like the central bank of the information economy, right? It gives the confidence, the trust, and sometimes the supervision as well that's required for the system to function effectively. They call out some great examples of when journalism has provided actually huge economic returns. The Panama Papers, right? They were published 9 years ago. Since then, tax agencies around the world have recovered $1.86 billion, right? For a series that cost a few $100,000 to write and to publish. There's research in India showing that the expansion of regional radio, which is really cheap, actually, to do, increases crop yields in farmers, with farmers by 15%, right? Massive knock-on effects on health, on productivity, and so on. So, if we can value media properly, there's always money for economic growth. Look at the AI space, right? It's not that there isn't money there. It's that we're not valuing media in the right way.
What do you think is trending, Mike? What's coming next? This whole conference is about what comes next. We know that we're facing massive issues.
Yeah.
What did the nerds say?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's connected to broader anxieties about democracy itself. And in the US in particular, the anxiety is that we are not really represented through the actions of our electoral process, right? That those representing us are not truly responsive and not truly accountable. That's a deep-seated feeling in America right now. And the challenge that we have is Americans also believe, as much as they think that's terrible, that it's unchangeable. They think that there's no way to fix it. They've been told for decades that you can't, amend our Constitution, that these rulings about money and politics can't be changed, that redistricting just is what it is because you can't move it. These are all changeable things, right? Our Constitution is a mutable object. Jill Lepore has a new book out. I'm kind of interested to see whether that gets some traction. I think the democratic imagination in America has faded. I think that's where some revitalization can come, which is to actually say, they're telling us we can't do a lot of these things. Maybe we can.
It is Thursday, which means it's good news only on my channel. Do you have any good news for us on the funding space for new media and media?
Some good news, which is that next month at the Paris Peace Forum, we're organizing the International Conference on Information Integrity and Independent Media. It's supported by the governments of Ghana and of France. We'll have heads of states and foreign ministers all making commitments to support independent media, to fund journalism around the world. And so, we'd love to have you there, and hopefully we'll come back with more finances to resource this space.
I can hope so, right? We have to have whimsy. We have to be forward-thinking, and we have to realize, like you said, maybe it looks very divided online, but as soon as you get in person with people, you start to realize you have more in common, and that you both still really do believe in democracy. So, thank you both for being with me. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to everyone who watched the stream online. There's a lot more awesome content here at the Clinton Global Initiative. I hope you have a great conference.
We would like to thank you for coming to our sessions in the Mercury Ballroom. Please join us in the Grand Ballroom for an exciting final general session.